appreciate it. Good morning. Yes, question? Well, when will the homeworks be available? Good question. Today, I'll post homework number 1 and homework number 2. In the last class, well, I guess homework number 1 combined covers everything. But bottom line is, you will see homework assignment or assignments that cover equilibrium, consumer producer surplus, and price ceiling, price floor. Okay? Now in the last class, if you remember, we introduced the procedure to calculate market equilibrium. We introduced the concept of consumer surplus, producer surplus, and we actually analyzed the first policy, and that was price ceiling, right? Today, we will briefly review, we will throw those numbers again on the board so that we refresh your memory, and then we will extend that intuition and that analysis to the study of price floor, which is basically a flip side of price ceiling, okay? And it's only going to reinforce your understanding. You will see exactly what's going on. We will certainly finish this in the first half of today's class. Then we will introduce another policy, and we will see the power or the usefulness of this analysis. Basically, you will see side by side 2 policies that are essentially accomplishing a similar goal in 2 different ways, yet they have profoundly different efficiency consequences. Okay? And you will basically have a chance to appreciate the power of the method we're developing here. If we have any time left after that, we will introduce the last batch of policies, and that's going to be tax and subsidy. If we don't get that far, tax and subsidy will be left for Tuesday next week. Okay? So that's the program for today. Before we dig in and start crunching the numbers, let's ask, why are we doing this? What's the point of calculating equilibrium and consumer producer surplus? Well, what's the point of all that? I mean, other than, getting good grades and having 3 credits and all that good stuff. Why? Do you remember what the purpose of this course is? You've taken an econ class before, right? You've taken macro. What's the point of this micro? What was the point of macro? You got 3 credits.
To learn about the economy.
To learn about the economy. You're absolutely right. What did you learn about the economy in macro? If you have to squeeze it into one sentence.
Consumers' wants, consumers' needs, imports, exports, just how a lot of trade and stuff in the world.
Mm-hmm. And so what did you learn about a lot of trade in the world? This is not a test, don't take me wrong. I'm not testing you.
Yes. To diagnose different economies and which ones are healthy and sick and implement different policies to fix them.
Yeah, absolutely. You could basically squeeze it into a health of the economy, right? Basically, you're absolutely right. You learned about it, in macro, you learn about the health of the economy. How can you tell whether the economy is healthy or not? When you find out it's not healthy, because its 3 vital signs are out of whack, right? Macroeconomic growth or economic growth, inflation and unemployment. When those are out of whack, you know something's wrong with the economy. For example, it's in recession, right? You can diagnose the problem. You can diagnose the problem, contractionary gap. Question is, what can we do about it? What can we do about contractionary gap? Anyone remembers what can be done about contractionary gap?
Expansionary policy.
Expansionary policies. What are those 2 policies we can implement?
Fiscal and...
Fiscal expansionary policy, monetary expansionary policy. Now a curveball. Do you remember how to do fiscal expansionary policy?
No.
Can you design fiscal expansionary policy?
Increase government spending.
Say it very loud.
Increase government spending and decrease taxes.
And or cut taxes, absolutely, congratulations. You just designed expansionary fiscal policy, expansionary monetary policy, anyone?
Other way around.
That would be contractionary fiscal, I'm asking expansionary monetary. In other words, accomplishing the same thing only with monetary tools.
An open market purchase.
Open market purchases of bonds by the Fed will lead to money supply
And then lower interest rates.
expansion, lower interest rates, higher investment, right? Higher investment and shift in aggregate demand. Remember, this is what you learned in macro. Basically, is the economy healthy? And if no, what can we do about it? That's what you learned there. What we're learning in this class is not the health of the economy. What we're learning in this class is what makes the economy efficient, okay? About efficiency of the economy. And we have to do it fundamentally, in a fundamentally different way than we learned about the health of the economy. Why? Because efficiency of the economy is a function of its very basic building blocks. Okay? Efficiency of the economy is a result of the efficiency of individual markets that comprise the big market economy, right? Market for milk, market for cars, market for education, market for healthcare, and so on and so forth. And how efficient these individual markets are that determines how the economy as a whole is efficient. So here in this class, we're asking a fundamental question. What makes the economy efficient? And we learned so far that to find the secret of efficiency, which we have not found yet, it's still going to take us a couple of weeks before you see where the efficiency comes from. But so far we know that on our quest to efficiency, we have to take a microscope, right? And look at the tiniest building block of the market economy, and that is a market, right? And so that's what we did. So far, we're taking a look at a market. And of course, we introduced those constituent parts of the market, demand and supply. We learned how to find equilibrium in the market. In other words, we learned the mechanism in which the market determines the price and the quantity of a good, right? You've seen the market forces at work, deficit, surplus, right? How they push price towards the equilibrium. So we now have a little bit of intuition for how markets work in equilibrium, certainly. And now we are starting to ask, how is market performance, that means the quantity and price, affected by various policies, such as price ceiling, which is what we did in the last class, right? And we found out several things. First of all, once you impose price ceiling, a policy, is the market still in equilibrium? Does the market remain in equilibrium when you impose a policy such as price ceiling? No. The policy tends to knock the market out of equilibrium, right? That's the one thing we've seen. Price changes, quantities change, stuff happens in the market. And then, of course, we're asking, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And it turns out the answer is not as simple. The answer, frankly, depends on who you ask, right? When you impose price ceiling, in other words, you depress the price with a government policy, and you ask the lucky consumers who get a good deal how they feel about the policy, what are they going to tell you? Oh, we're loving it, right? If you ask the sellers, the suppliers, the firms that now are forced to sell at a depressed price, what are they going to tell you? Oh, we're hating it, right? They can't stand it. So, you see, we found out that consequences of a policy are ambiguous. Some people end up being better off, some people are being worse off. Now, frankly, you don't need to crunch many numbers to understand that policies make some people better off, some people worse off. why are we doing it numerically? Why have we been doing it numerically in the last class? Do you remember what the point of all that number crunching is? So that we can not just conclude that, look, these people are better off, those people are worse off. We can actually quantify how much better off somebody is, how much worse off somebody else is. Why is it important to actually measure misery of some people and happiness of others? What's the point? When I tell you, how are you doing today? And I couldn't be better. I feel so good, something worked out for you. I don't ask you, just how much better off are you than yesterday? By 5, by 6, who cares? I'm happy, right? So what's the point of actually measuring these changes in well-being? I mean, you don't do it on an everyday basis. Why are we doing it here? Well, so that we can measure, so that we can compare benefits of a policy and the detriment the policy causes to other people. And once you can compare that, then you see what the impact of the policy is on the population, right? In other words, if I take your money and give that money to you, you're going to be upset, you're going to be happy. But if I take $10 from you and give $80 to you, you're going to be upset more than he's happy. That makes sense? But then again, both of you are angry at me because I just kept $2, right? Is that what's going on in these analyses? No. Guys, what we're going to find out over and over again is that I'm a government, I come up with a policy, take your $10, give you $8, and what happens to $2? I don't keep it. What is taxed I keep. But there's always some money that ends up missing. What's that all about? We called it deadweight loss in the last class. I'll show it to you again. Guys, it's literally lost. It annihilates. It violates the laws of physics, right? It is literally lost. So between the two of you, there was $10. I took your $10, and instead of giving you $10, which would leave the two of you on average okay, I took your $10, gave you $8, $2. So the two of you before had $10, now the two of you have $8. Are the two of you combined better off or worse off? Worse off. That's how we measure inefficiency. Efficiency loss due to the policy, okay? So that's the narrative behind the numbers. And now that we understand the narrative, let's crunch the numbers. Now, if you choose not to take notes now, you're not losing any information. I'm just going to redo exactly the same exercise we had in the last class. I will ask you to please work with me, blur those numbers so it goes fast, so that you learn to perceive these problems intuitively. And of course, like I mentioned, you will have the recording of this on Blackboard. So, we are working with the market where the supply is given by P equals 2 plus Q, correct? And we're working with a demand given by P equals 8 minus Q, correct? Is that what we used in the last class? Very good. 8 quantity price. Let's first study this market in equilibrium. Can you tell me what the equilibrium price is? Well, we set the right-hand sides equal to each other, right, as your colleague here suggested. 2 plus Q equals 8 minus Q. We crunched the algebra and we found out that equilibrium quantity is 3. And we found out that equilibrium price is $5. Excellent. So we know equilibrium quantity 3, equilibrium price $5, sorry, price $5. And then we established or we calculated consumer, producer, and total surplus as a baseline against which we compare the changes due to the policy, right? That we impose later. So how do we calculate consumer surplus? How do we calculate consumer surplus? How do we calculate consumer surplus? Let's go.
The top triangle,
Area of the top triangle. How tall is it?
8,
$3,
From 5 to 8. How tall is it?
3.
3 times 3 divided by 2 is
450.
450. Very good. Now we know how to calculate consumer surplus. We're calculating consumer surplus as the area of the top triangle. What is consumer surplus?
Demand and price.
Okay, elaborate. What is, do you guys remember? There's a difference between how we calculate it. It's a triangle, or area of a triangle, and what it is. What is the consumer surplus? Yes?
How good of a deal you got?
How good of a deal you got. How do you know how good of a deal you got? What are you comparing to find out just how good of a deal you got?
Price you're willing to pay and price you actually pay.
Exactly. That's the difference. That's your consumer surplus, right? Now this here is consumer surplus of all the consumers, right? Because the demand curve basically shows you the highest price each of those consumers would be willing to pay, right? So the difference between the highest price they would be willing to pay and the price they actually paying is the consumer surplus. And when you add that consumer surplus for all the consumers, you basically add up the area of the triangle. That makes sense?
Yep.
That's the intuition. Very good. So, consumer surplus $4.50. Producer surplus, how do we measure it?
Bottom triangle,
The bottom triangle, how tall is it?
3.
3 times 3 divided by 2, 450, right? See, it's quick, it's easy. Total surplus
It's $9.
is the sum of the two, $9. And very good. So we have a market in equilibrium. In equilibrium, consumers are paying $5 per unit. 3 units are produced, 3 units are sold. Consumers enjoy $4.50 consumer surplus, producers enjoy $4.50 producer surplus, total surplus $9. Okay? Now, we're going to introduce price ceiling. Flesh. Supply P equals 2 plus Q. Very good. Price, quantity. Now, we're going to introduce price ceiling. What price ceiling did we introduce in the last class?
Rental.
$3, right? $3. What's the purpose of price ceiling? Why would the government impose price ceiling? What's the purpose of a policy like that? How does a government sell the policy to the public? How does the government convince the public that it's a good thing? What's good about it? It benefits the consumers, absolutely. It's sold on the basis of benefit it's supposed to provide to consumers through lower price, right? So if we impose a $3 price ceiling, $3 price ceiling, from now on, consumers are buying for $3, not $5 as before. How do you think consumers feel about it? Consumers love lower prices, and at lower prices, consumers would be willing to, at that lower price, $3, consumers would be willing to buy how much? What would be the quantity demanded? What's the quantity consumers are willing and able to buy? The quantity demanded. Well, demand curve, which tells you what consumers are willing and able to buy, demand curve tells you that at price 3, consumers are willing and able to buy 5 units, exactly. On the other hand, how do producers feel about such low price? They don't like it. It doesn't really make it a worthwhile activity to produce this good at such a low price. And it turns out that at price 3, only 1 unit is supplied. Correct? Very good. Now, let's take a look at that market and compare it to the equilibrium and tell me, is the market with price ceiling in equilibrium? No, it definitely doesn't look like an equilibrium. First of all, price is no longer the equilibrium price. Now it's the price ceiling 3 as opposed to equilibrium price 5. Of course, what happens to quantities in the market? Are they in equilibrium? No, at this disequilibrium price. The quantity demand and quantity supplied are no longer equal to each other. In fact, the market ends up with, what do we call that difference?
Deficit.
Deficit of how much?
4.
Deficit of 4 units. Very good. Now, this policy, of course, was designed to help consumers. So let's see what the impact is on consumers, what the impact is then on producers, and what is the overall impact on well-being in the market. So let's start with consumer surplus. Now, of course, after the policy was introduced, we will refer to consumer surplus as CS prime, meaning after tax, right? How do we calculate consumer surplus after tax? Oh, sorry, what am I talking? Not after tax, after price ceiling, after the policy was introduced, right? Well, first of all, consumer surplus generally is being calculated as the area of the top triangle, right? So is it going to be as simple as simply calculating the area of this large top triangle above the price, below demand? Why not? Why that is not the measure of consumer surplus when policy is imposed?
Because they're only, the quantity is only one.
Very good. In other words, it would be the measure of consumer surplus if there are really 5 consumers who can buy this thing at the price $3, right? If 5 consumers luck out and get a great deal on this thing for $3, there's going to be a large consumer surplus. But is that what is happening in this market? Is it really 5 units that are being sold at that low price? No, because 5 units are not produced. Only 1 unit is produced. And so only consumer surplus associated with consumption of 1 unit at $3 is being realized. So it's not the whole triangle that measures consumer surplus. It's only a part of that triangle corresponding to that 1 unit. Does that make sense? Cool. So we said it's not the whole triangle, it's only this part, right? This part that has a shape of trapezoid. And of course, the only way to calculate the area of that trapezoid is to cut it in 2 parts, the top little triangle and the bottom rectangle. And then calculate these 2 areas separately and add them up. How do you calculate the area of the top triangle? You have to know how tall that top triangle is, right? But we don't know that because we don't know this number. How do we find that missing number? Well, we have to start with what we do know. That missing number on the price axis is a price coordinate of this point. What do we know about that point? 2 things. It lies on the demand curve, right? And it lies on the demand curve at quantity 1. So let's use demand curve on which that point lies and ask, what is the price coordinate of the point on the demand curve at quantity 1? And what do we find?
7.
It is 7. So now we know the value of the missing value, right? Now we know this is 7. So can you tell me now how tall is the small triangle? From 7 to 8. 1 times 1 is 1, divided by 2 is 0.5, 50 cents, right? But of course, consumer surplus also contains the area of this bottom rectangle. How tall is the rectangle? 4 times 1. So we know consumer surplus after the ceiling was imposed is 450. Why did the government actually impose the ceiling? What was the purpose of the ceiling? To help consumers. Does it help consumers?
No.
In this particular example, it doesn't even help consumers. How is it possible? The price is lower. Why aren't consumers going bananas over fantastic deal they're getting? Because they're not getting that much of a deal. Only one unit is produced at that super deal price. So most consumers actually have to go home empty-handed, right? Are you looking forward to Black Friday? Maybe some of you go and wait in that line. Now imagine there's 1,000 of you in front of a Walmart waiting for that fantastic deal on a flat panel TV. But it turns out they only have one in that store. So one of you goes home happy with a big grin and large consumer surplus, right? And the rest of you what? Nothing. You go empty-handed. So, price ceiling in this particular example is so aggressive that while it makes this one lucky consumer very happy, there are other consumers who used to buy at equilibrium price, and now they can't, and their surplus is lost. So as a result, there is no net change in consumer surplus, total consumer surplus, in this particular example. Is that always going to be the result? No. Sometimes price ceiling will increase consumer surplus. Sometimes it doesn't change it, and sometimes it may even decrease it. Okay? Very good. How about producer surplus? How do we find producer surplus? Well, that's the simple part, right? It's measured as the area of the bottom triangle. Can you see the bottom triangle? It's right there. How tall is it? 1 times 1 divided by 2 is 50 cents. What happened to producer surplus? Decreased dramatically. When you impose price ceiling and you depress the price, and you see producer surplus going down, is there ever an example where producer surplus will go up or will remain unchanged? What do you think? In response to price ceiling that depresses the price. In other words, are you as a producer ever made better off if you're forced to sell at lower price?
Are you better off? No.
You cannot. That's something you will always, in other words, price ceiling always makes producers worse off. Of course, it was never introduced to make producers happy, right? It was introduced to make consumers happy. And sometimes it does make them happy, sometimes not. And sometimes it makes them worse off. But producers, no, it always makes producers worse off. Okay? Very good. But none of this is surprising. All of this is something you would have been able to ascertain simply by intuition. What about total surplus? What is the total surplus with price ceiling? $5. What is the impact of the price ceiling on total surplus? It decreases the total surplus. By how much? How much? By $4. We call that the deadweight loss of the price ceiling, and that is $4 in this case. $4.
It's called the dead weight, what was it?
Deadweight loss. Deadweight loss. Yes. Now, to understand what the deadweight loss is, it may come handy to actually overlay equilibrium and price ceiling in one picture. Let me try and do it in this particular diagram, in this particular graph, so that you can see what happens. Let me use a different color. This was the equilibrium quantity, right? This was the equilibrium price. This was the equilibrium, this was the consumer surplus in equilibrium. This was the producer surplus in equilibrium. This is the producer surplus with price ceiling. Now, first of all, what happened to producer surplus? This used to be producer surplus in equilibrium. Now, producer surplus has this weird shape of a trapezoid. Completely changed, right? On the other hand, producer surplus used to be this nice large triangle at the bottom, and now the producer surplus is just the shadow of its former self, right? It's a fraction of the old big triangle. In other words, that producer surplus triangle has been depressed by the lower price. That makes sense? Now notice that part of those former producer surplus, part of it has become the consumer surplus of that one lucky consumer that can buy at the price 3, right? But has all of that former producer surplus been captured by the lucky consumer? No. Frankly, and I'm running out of colors, which is not a big problem, this part of producer surplus that producers used to enjoy in equilibrium is now not a part of anything. This part of the former producer surplus is still enjoyed by producers. This part of the former producer surplus is now enjoyed by the consumer. But this part is enjoyed by nobody. On the other hand, when you take a look at consumer surplus, this was consumer surplus. Now only this part is still the consumer surplus. This part of the consumer surplus is not enjoyed by anybody once we impose the policy. How is it possible? What happens to that consumer surplus? Consumers enjoyed in equilibrium. What happens to this part of producer surplus? Producers enjoyed in equilibrium.
Vanishes.
It vanishes. Why does it vanish? How can something vanish? Look at the quantities, guys. In equilibrium, producers produced 3 units and consumers consumed 3 units. Now that the policy is in place, producers only produce 1 unit. What happens to produce a surplus associated with the production of the second and third unit? What happens to this part of the producer surplus? It vanishes because the second and third units are no longer
So,
produced. Absolutely. Produced and sold. How about consumer surplus? What happened to this part of consumer surplus? Well, that part of consumer surplus was associated with enjoying the purchase of the and consumption of the second unit and third unit at the equilibrium price 5. But since the second and third units are no longer produced, that part of consumer surplus is lost. That makes sense? So it's basically lost well-being of producers who used to produce, now are not producing. Lost well-being of consumers who used to consume, now are not consuming. Way back when, you could have afforded a nice vacation. You enjoyed it. Now that vacations are no longer offered because producers reduced production, if you don't take a vacation, how much fun are you having? You used to have fun, now you have none. You lost fun. That makes sense? That's the whole idea. So how much consumer surplus is lost? How much producer surplus is lost? Let's start with the lost consumer surplus. Remember, this year used to be price 5, right? Equilibrium price 5. How tall is this triangle representing lost consumer surplus? 2 times 2 units that no longer are enjoyed is 4 divided by 2, $2. Consumers lost $2 in consumer surplus. How about the producer surplus? From 3 to 5 is 2 times 2 divided by 2 is 2. Producers lost $2 in producer surplus. When consumers lose $2, producers lose $2, how much do they lose together? That's the deadweight loss. That makes sense? So the shaded area, these 2 triangles combined, this large triangle basically, represents the deadweight loss of the price ceiling, of the policy, right? In other words, the combination of consumer and producer surplus that vanished as a result of decreased production. That makes sense? Excuse me. So, let me just try and tie this to a larger story, larger narrative. We will use deadweight loss as a measure of inefficiency, just how much inefficiency a policy causes, right? Why? Why does it make sense to use deadweight loss as a measure of inefficiency? Well, because deadweight loss results from changed production, right? In this case, from lost production, decrease in production from 3 to 1. Why would that be a meaningful way to talk about inefficiency? Let me remind you, do you remember our first day when we talked about what economy is? Do you remember what economy is? What is economy? Economy is that system that takes the resources and does what with them? Transforms them into goods and services, right? Economy is a system that transforms resources into goods and services. Every economy does that. What sets efficient economies apart from other economies? All economies do this, but efficient economies do it how?
with less deadweight loss.
Say it again?
With less deadweight loss.
That's where we're headed. But in terms of this concept of economy,
More efficient.
what does it mean for an economy to be efficient?
Minimal resources with maximum goods and services.
You can put it that way, right? In other words, out of given resources, you not just produce goods and services, you produce maximum amount of goods and services, right? Guys, when you impose the ceiling and the output falls from 3 to 1, are you producing maximum amount? Or you're producing less than you could? Is that efficient? There you go, right? So you already have a first intuitive feel for how this all ties to efficiency. Very good. Of course, the story is more complex than that, but at least you see where we're going with the concept of deadweight loss. It measures just how inefficient market becomes as a result of a certain policy. Very good. Do you have any questions about any of these numbers? If not, let me leave this picture on the board and let me now, actually no, let me erase this picture and let me now introduce the second variant of this policy, and that is price floor. What do you think price floor is going to be? Say it again? Well, when it's price floor, then it's going to be, excuse me, when it's price floor, it's going to be
Below
the lowest
price.
price, right? Basically some kind of a floor imposed on price, or a floor bottom imposed not to let the price drop any lower. Why do you think governments would consider imposing price floors? What would be a good reason to impose a price floor?
Could it be about tax?
Companies compete with each other.
Companies competing against each
Yeah,
other?
prices like,
And-
some laptops like,
Okay.
it could be like 200 instead of $1,200.
Okay. And so the price floor then helps?
Decreasing consumer spending.
It ends up decreasing consumers. I don't know if consumer spending actually. It certainly decreases. Okay. First, let's have a look. Price floor means that the government maintains price relatively high, doesn't let it fall, right? Who do you think the government is trying to help by maintaining artificially high
The
price?
suppliers.
Meaning the firms, exactly, the suppliers, the companies, right? So if price ceiling, by depressing the price, is designed to help consumers, price floor, by lifting the price, is designed to help producers, right? That's the idea. How do you think consumers feel about price floor?
They don't like it.
They hate it, exactly. So it's going to be basically a mirror image of our exploration of price ceiling, right? Now we're going to explore price floor. So, let me erase this picture. And let's use the same market to study the impact of price floor. So first of all, we have price, quantity, that's no better, supply, demand, A, 8, demand, P equals 8 minus Q, supply, yes? 2 plus Q, 2. Now, we're going to impose price floor in order to lift the floor to help producers. Where would you set the price floor? How high would you go, or how low would it be? Would you impose price floor below 5 or above 5?
Below 5.
If you want to help producers,
You would put it above.
you're going to impose it above 5 so that producers can sell at higher prices, right? So let's say we impose price floor at 6. Price floor is $6, above 5, okay? And let's see what the impact is. First of all, how do firms feel? How do firms feel about that price floor? Well, firms like selling at higher prices, right? Firms like selling at higher prices. At such a high price, firms will be willing and able to produce quantity supplied of how much? At price 6, firms would like to produce how much?
4.
2 plus how much is equal to 6? 2 plus 4 equals 6, right? How do you think consumers feel about new higher price? They don't like it. At such a high price, consumers are only willing and able to buy quantity demanded of how much? At price 6,
2.
8 minus 2 is 6. Very good. So, excuse me. Is the market now in equilibrium once the price floor is imposed? No. Equilibrium price is 5, price floor is 6. Equilibrium quantity was 3. Now, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are no longer equal to each other. Instead, firms are willing and able to produce more than consumers are willing and able to buy. What's the difference between the two quantities? Well, it is a surplus. Surplus in the market. Now, this surplus is something else from consumer-producer surplus. It simply means excess supply, right? Excess willingness by firms to produce something that consumers don't want to buy. How big is the surplus?
2.
2 units. Very good. In other words, firms are willing and able to produce 2 more units than consumers are willing and able to buy. Very good. Now, how do you think this price floor impacts consumers? Does it make them better off or worse off? Of course, worse off, because consumers were accustomed to buying at $5. Now they're forced to buy at $6. Price is higher, so of course they're worse off. Just how much worse off? Let's find consumer surplus. How tall is the consumer surplus triangle?
2.
2 times
2.
2 is 4 divided by 2 is $2. Excellent. Take a look at the consumers. Are they better off or worse off? Substantially worse off, right? That's not surprising. The policy was not designed to help consumers. It was designed to help producers. Let's see how producers benefit from this policy, and whether the producers benefit from this policy. How do we find producer surplus here? Well, producer surplus is typically calculated as the area of the bottom triangle, right? Can you see the bottom triangle? It's a nice big bottom triangle. Does that area of that large bottom triangle measure producer surplus? Why not?
Is it stopped by the quantity demanded?
It would if producers actually produced 4 units and sold them at price $6. They would make a killing and enjoy a nice big producer surplus. But is that what's happening? No. Producers only sell 2 units, and so only enjoy producer surplus corresponding to the quantity that consumers actually buy. So this is the area representing the size of the producer surplus. Again, it's a trapezoid. In order to find the area of that trapezoid, we have to break it down into the top rectangle and bottom triangle. To find the area of the rectangle, find the area of the triangle, we have to find this particular number. How are we going to find it? Once again, we know it is a price coordinate of this point. What do we know about this point? Which curve does it lie on?
Supply curve.
It lies on the supply curve. At which quantity?
2.
At quantity 2. What is the price coordinate of the supply curve at quantity 2?
4.
Excellent. So we know this number is 4. Can you now tell me how tall is the rectangle? 2 and wide? 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Of course, producer surplus also covers the area of that bottom triangle. How tall is the bottom triangle?
2.
2 times
2.
2 divided by 2 is $2. So, producer surplus is actually how much?
$6.
$6. Take a look at the producers. Are producers actually benefiting from that price floor? See, price floor was designed to help producers. Is it helping producers? Yes, it is helping producers. So here we have an example of a policy designed to help producers is actually helping producers. Of course, in the process, it harms consumers. Well, that's life, guys. No one ever said life was fair. Policies help some people, hurt other people. What's wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with that? Well, it's not about the fact that some people are better off and some are worse off. It's about how much better off, how much worse off, right? So, the policy was designed to make producers better off. How much are producers actually benefiting from the policy? How much does producer surplus increase thanks to the policy? How much? $1.50. So producers are $1.50 happier, right? Enjoy $1.50 larger producer surplus. But of course, the benefit to producers comes at a cost. Comes to the detriment to consumers, right? How large is the drop in consumer surplus as a result of that price floor? Consumers used to enjoy $4.50 of consumer surplus. Now they're left with $2. How much did consumers lose? Consumers lost $2.50. You see? So we made producers $1.50 happier at the cost of $2.50 to consumers. Is that okay? Is that okay if I take your $2.50, give you $1.50? Is that the best way we can do it? Well, if I kept the difference, if I kept the dollars, okay. I'm also a member of this class, okay? We as a group would be just as well off as we were before. But the problem here is that the government makes some people $1.50 better off, some people $2.50 worse off, and a dollar is completely lost, vanishes. So, what is the deadweight loss? $1, exactly. If consumer surplus is $2, producer surplus is $6, total surplus is $8. 2 plus 6 is 8. Total surplus used to be 9. Now it is 8. Deadweight loss is $1, right?
Isn't the price floor, at least like even though consumer spending, they get hit too, but doesn't it kind of distribute a little bit better? When we did the price ceiling,
Okay.
the producers lost $4, but the consumers didn't lose anything. So
They didn't gain anything.
Yeah, they didn't gain anything either, but the producers took a big hit by
Exactly.
losing the $4.
Why do you think was that? What's the difference between this example of a price floor and that example of price ceiling? Why are the results so different? Here, somebody loses, somebody gains. There, somebody lost a lot and nobody gained, right? Why do you think the difference, there is this difference?
Because consumer spending dictates a lot of it. I mean, if
Let me tell you, let me point your attention to the following. Look, this is equilibrium. Once we introduce price floor, we raise the price from 5 to 6, right? In our example of a price ceiling, we depress the price from 5 down to 3. Can you appreciate the difference? Here we raise the price a little bit. Here we depress the price a lot. In other words, it's the size or the severity of that policy that determines the final outcome, right?
Okay.
In other words, if you change that price, it's not about whether it's up or down, it's about how much. If you change that price a little bit, the ones who are supposed to benefit tend to benefit. The others lose. If you change that price a lot, even the benefit to those who are supposed to benefit is getting smaller and smaller. And ultimately, if you change that price really severely, nobody benefits. Consider, for example, if instead of price floor of 6, I impose the price floor of 8. What would happen here? What if the price floor was 8, guys?
No one would buy, no one would.
Consumers would simply stop buying that good. How much consumer surplus would they generate?
None.
0. How much would the firms produce if nobody's buying? 0. How much producer surplus would they have? 0. So if you impose such a severe price floor all the way to $8, consumer surplus is 0, producer surplus is 0, all of the surplus is lost. That makes sense? So it's the size of the policy. Again, homework number 1, you will practice this. Homework number 2, you will practice this and you will see the results. Yes, question?
posted the homework yet?
No, I'm going to post it today. All right. Do you have any questions about this? Now, you start understanding certain subtleties, how the size of that policy or the relative change in price actually impacts the overall effect on the market and so on and so forth. Still, when you take a look at price floor, you compare it against price ceiling, you see that they're basically two versions of one and the same thing, right? It's like a mirror image of one another. With a ceiling, we're depressing the price. With floor, we're increasing the price. With price floor, market results in surplus. With price ceiling, market resulted in shortage, deficit, right? One policy is designed to benefit one group of people, the other policy designed the other group of people. Mirror image. But there's one thing that both policies have in common, where both policies work in the same direction. What is it? Which change, or change in which variable, is going in the same direction? Total surplus. What happens to total surplus as a result of the price floor? Decreases. What happens to total surplus as a result of price ceiling? Decreases. Both policies decrease total surplus and generate deadweight loss, right? Result in deadweight loss. Why is it? Because both of them reduce the efficiency of the market. And eventually, as we are exploring efficiency more and more, we will show that market in equilibrium produces goods and services efficiently. Once you knock the market out of equilibrium by either price ceiling or price floor, you reduce efficiency of the market. And that resulting inefficiency is then quantified by the deadweight loss, right? Now, we're going to take a short break in a few minutes, and we're going to introduce another policy. That policy, from the formal point of view, as a graph, is going to look quite similar to price floor. And many of the results are going to remind us of the results we see here. And ultimately, you will see that that new policy we're about to introduce after the break, that new policy basically accomplishes roughly the same policy objective as this policy. Guess what's going to happen to total surplus with that other policy? Is it going to go up or down? It's going to go down again. Why? Because that other policy also distorts equilibrium and reduces efficiency of the market. Are you going to be shocked when you see that result? Is it something wholly unexpected? No. So far we've been through two policies, ceiling and floor. Both of them reduced total surplus. Both of them resulted in inefficiency. Now you're going to see a third one. So what? How surprised are you going to be? You're not going to be surprised at all. In fact, you're going to start asking a question. How long? How much more of this same thing? I mean, why are we doing this? Why are we basically going to introduce another policy that looks awfully similar to this one? And again, it's going to be inefficient. Guys, it's going to be a very useful exercise. It's going to be an exercise in implementing an alternative policy that accomplishes a similar policy goal. And the policy goal was to help producers, right? So we're going to implement an alternative policy, also designed to help producers. And you will see just how similar those policies are. Well, which one do you think would you support as a voter? Or which one would you oppose as a voter? If both of them are very similar, well, you will see that while both of them result in inefficiency, that inefficiency is dramatically different. One of them is inefficient, the other one is horribly inefficient. This is why this analysis is being used to practically evaluate various policy alternatives so that you can capture inefficiencies each of those policy alternatives imposes on the market. Why is it important to do it? I'm not saying it's rocking your boat, but why is it good to have people who actually know how to do it? Why should we care, guys?
Because it affects us.
How does it affect us?
Money.
Because government imposes thousands of policies at all levels, right? We have all kinds of policies here at Duval County, at the state level, at the federal level, taxes, all kinds of regulations, right? Those are all policies. Do you think all those policies affect efficiency?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely they do. Now, would you prefer that we implement policies that are very inefficient or that are less inefficient? Less inefficient. Why does it matter? Because if you don't pay attention to that sort of stuff and you start implementing policies that are very inefficient, maybe not tomorrow, maybe next week, but in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you may be living in a poor country. That's the difference it makes. How do we know that that's how serious it potentially is? Because we've seen it happen. I grew up in a country that after World War II was among 10 most industrialized nations on earth. Then it started implementing policies that were deeply inefficient, were harmful to efficiency, and kept imposing those policies for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Guess what happened to that country within those 4 decades? It ended up poorer on per capita basis, GDP per capita basis, than Mexico. one of the top-notch industrialized nations, was reduced to basically an emerging market or developing country. And like I said, it doesn't happen overnight, it doesn't happen in a month, but give it a few years. By the time you're raising your kids, you may be raising your kids in an underperforming, pitiful place. Is that what you want? How are you going to make sure it's not going to happen? You're going to learn these boring things and make sure you don't elect incompetent politicians that will impose inefficiencies on American markets. That make sense? Awesome. You deserve 15 minutes, okay? Can you please stop? Thank you.